So everyone, I'm Ainsley. So I wanted to give a talk about hacking without getting hacked. So a few of you in the audience might know me kind of from a software engineering side of things. I go to hackathons a lot. I like to build stuff. But actually, before I learned how to do software engineering, I was heavily involved in learning how to break things. So I kind of wanted to share my experiences from being on kind of both sides of the fence and help you guys build software and companies that are built in such a way that it's going to make it extremely hard for people to attack you from outside. So I'm going to split this talk into two halves. One side is going to be the engineering side of how you build software in a way that's going to make it hard for you to get hacked. This is kind of for the technical co-founder or even an early engineering employee of a company. It's advice to keep in mind when you're writing software to make sure it's secure. And then on the second side of things, I'm going to talk a little bit about ways you can build a company from the operational side of things so that you build security into the culture of your company. So I'm going to start off with engineering. One really, really important engineering principle to keep in mind, and I'm sorry, I didn't actually know the way the screen would be organized, so you won't be able to see if you're at the back. But the first point that I've got here is never trust the user. Most of the security flaws that come in applications today come from the misunderstanding of what information users have control over and trusting it in ways that allow a malicious user to attack your system. So, for example, there's cross-site scripting attacks, there's SQL injection attacks, and they all stem from the core assumptions that people make when they're writing software where they believe that the user is handing them information they expect. This means that you should always be looking to sanitize user input, and you should even if you're just passing information to a user and expecting them to pass it back, you should always verify that information. Second thing which you always need to keep in mind when building software, think like an attacker. Every time you write some software, look at your own code with a critical eye and think, how can someone break this? Are the assumptions that I've made when I've written this code always true in all of the different circumstances? A malicious attacker is going to look at your application, and they're going to probably look at it in ways that most people aren't going to expect. It's an entirely different mindset. You need to keep that sort of stuff in mind when you're writing software for your company. This one, really, really important, make the stupid impossible. This is something which companies build into their culture when they start, and it can serve them all the way through. What does this mean in practice? It means please use frameworks if they are available, because frameworks solve problems that you probably haven't thought of. So just take, for example, Ruby on Rails or Django. Just by using the parts of those frameworks that handle user input and put it into the database, it protects you from a gigantic amount of really, really simple mistakes that people make. I actually spent a summer at Facebook, and inside Facebook, the frameworks that they use, that engineers build on top of, make it literally impossible for someone to push code into production that does stupid stuff. There are specific examples of this, but Facebook have kind of ingrained to their culture that people are going to make mistakes. Engineers will make mistakes. People might try and fix a bug. They're working super late. They just want to push the code. And that's where so many security flaws come from. So if you just start by building a foundation that makes it impossible to do stupid things, just use frameworks. It gets rid of a whole class of these problems. Frameworks won't solve everything. There are a whole class of attacks that sometimes come from people making assumptions about their frameworks that aren't true. But it will catch the vast majority of these problems. Don't reinvent the wheel. This means use libraries that exist already. You're probably not a cryptographer. You probably don't have a degree in mathematics sufficient to understand exactly what's going on. But if you use existing libraries, it means that someone very, very smart has probably thought of the stuff already. So a bunch of companies have learned this the hard way. Sony learned this with the PS3. They had a horrible flaw in the random number generation on the PS3 that ended up causing pretty much all of their devices to be capable of being jailbroken. Adobe learned this the hard way with a massive password leak because they just didn't use an intelligent encryption algorithm, well, they used an encryption algorithm when they shouldn't have, when storing the passwords, that made it really, really easy to, once Adobe had been infiltrated, to just reverse engineer the passwords for a whole swath of their users. And this move fast and patch things. This pretty much means that things are going to go wrong in the security world all the time. Heartbleed, right now there's shell shock going on. Make sure that if something changes in the security world, that you're moving fast enough to be able to react if it's something that you can fix on your systems or update any dependencies that you have. If you're building an application, just be wary of the dependencies that you use. This is something which people who write in Node.js do a lot. They add a bunch of dependencies, a bunch of libraries into their projects. It's just more and more things which you have to update, a much, much larger surface area for someone to attack if they do want to come to your, attack your service. Operations side of things, protect your sites. If you have an application that's been built really, really securely, it's just equivalent to having an extremely fortified bank vault. But sometimes people aren't going to try and go through the front door of your bank. They're going to go around the sides. And if the sides are made out of wood, they're going to get in. This means personally, as a founder of a company, if I can't attack your website from the outside, I'm going to try and gain access to your accounts. That means attacking your email account, your Amazon account. There was a company called CodeSpaces who had an Amazon account that had all of the services, had all of their startup services on. And this Amazon account was owned by the founder. And I'm sure there were flaws in CodeSpaces in the code itself, but all the attacker had to do was gain access to the person's Amazon account, and they had access to all of the data of that company. So once the guy realized his Amazon account had been compromised, he actually ended up changing his password. But by then, the attacker already created a bunch of recovery keys for his Amazon account, signed right back in, ended up wiping absolutely everything. The company also had backups, but those backups were also on Amazon. So they got wiped too. So just personally, protect your own accounts. Always use two-factor authentication if it has it. It means that, if someone's trying to attack you, they'll also have to have your phone or something. It just saves you a whole bunch of hassle. Know your worth, make yourself less valuable. This is something which a bunch of Bitcoin startups learn the hard way. If you're dealing with, sort of untraceable internet money, it's kind of one of the most valuable things that people are going to want to steal. Making yourself a valuable target means that people are going to put in a lot more effort to try and attack you. If you know how much you're worth as a company, be it in personal information of your users, credit card details, Bitcoins, it makes you make informed decisions about how much you have to invest into security. So invest in knowing how much you're worth and making yourself less valuable, if possible. Have somebody that cares on your team. Make sure you have someone who knows about security, or they don't have to actually be on your team. If you're just starting off small, make sure you have contact with someone who you can ask questions, who can look at your service and give you the perspective of someone who is an attacker, give you an outsider's perspective, who can give you a perspective, a critical perspective of your infrastructure. Just make sure you have that kind of a resource available to you when you're looking into building a company. Check and double check. Build into your company culture the understanding that people are going to make mistakes and that that's fine, but that one person's mistake isn't able to ruin everything for everyone. This means code reviews. This means talking about big decisions about what information you're going to keep on people. And my final point is keep an ear to the ground. This means that think proactively about how security problems can affect your company and affect your users. One really, really nice thing that I know some big companies do is that when another major site gets hacked and the database gets released, they will try and gather a copy of that database and run it against their own users. So they can tell whether or not some of their own users have been compromised, whether they're using the same password on their service. So that way they can alert their users before the attack spreads any further. And not only does that protect your users and protect their personal information, it really builds trust, which is super important. So those are kind of my points of advice for you guys if you're building a startup. Thank you. If you've got any questions.